Welcome to another figure week, hard surface week, organic week.
Hey everyone, my name is Ahmed Al-Douri. I'm a concept artist and former instructor at Art Center College of Design, Brainstorm, CCS, CGMA, and various other places. And I would like to introduce to you this digital painting course that I've created. But before we get into anything, I just want to thank you for the support you've all given me this whole time. And with the support of so many of you, I've been able to put together everything I know about painting into this digital painting course. You want to become a pro illustrator, concept artist, or even just a hobbyist, but you don't have a clear map to get there. And that's where I come in. I spent the last 6 months compiling everything I know from my 20 years of art practice, and I've turned it all into a map. Starting with foundations such as rendering shapes, color theory, painting basic subjects, understanding brushwork, brush economy, all that fun stuff, deconstructing the skull, drawing it from every angle, all the way to master studies, stylized painting, and you'll find yourself at the end of the course doing a concept art project based on everything that we learn in the first 14 lessons. So how does it work? Well, you sign up, you watch the lectures, do the assignments, post them to the community page if you want, and treat it as a self-study, except for those of you who have signed up for the weekly meeting, where I personally critique your work in a virtual classroom setting. I believe learning by repetition is super important. That's what I've sort of presented a lot in this course, and the assignments are tailored for that, as adapted from my time teaching at Art Center. And each of these lessons have step-by-step explanations in real time. If you've ever seen my videos, you know exactly how I teach. And this course is intended to be a substitute for a college level course, but you don't have to pay the $4,000 or $5,000 per class, racking up maybe $200K in debt. With my custom design course, you'd be paying a fraction of that. And of course, I also have payment plan options if you don't want to pay for the whole thing at once. Thank you for watching this, and I'll see you soon.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Digital Artcast, another episode coming at you thick and fast from the last one. Again, from whatever is going on in the world right now, I hope you guys are staying safe and staying productive with some creative projects. I know that the guys have been emailing me saying that the podcast is kind of giving you guys a bit of ray hope at the moment, and it's something to kind of focus on or cling to while the world is in a bit of a tailspin right now. But yeah, another great episode here. One I was kind of approached with rather than me kind of chasing a guest. I think it's only natural, probably at the time I've been around, that people will eventually or inevitably come to me with guests or ideas for shows. So recently, a studio that's just kind of in its infancy has just kind of formed, and they reached out to talk about the formation of the studio and why they've made it, and some insight to what they've done in the past, very relative to what we talk about in here, which is art and the entertainment industry, VFX, films, games. So I thought it'd be a great guest to have on. We were supposed to have two of the members of the studio with us tonight, but one of them unfortunately has had to cancel last minute. So we have one of the studio heads kind of sitting with us just now, and let me introduce Hugh Behroozy. Hi Hugh, how are you doing?
Good. Hi Gordy.
Hello. Thank you for coming on, and also thank you for reaching out to come on to the podcast. It's always great when people want to offer to come on instead of me chasing you. So yeah, it was great.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, happy to chat.
Yeah, of course. So we talked a little before we started recording, but you have obviously a past in VFX and the film industry that obviously reaches back a while. If people don't know who you are or kind of your past at the moment, can you give me a kind of 30-second, a minute rundown of who you are, what you've done, where you've came from, all that kind of stuff?
Sure, yeah. I've worked in the visual effects industry for quite some time now. I've gotten to work on titles like Game of Thrones, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Justice League, Guardians of the Galaxy, Power Rangers, and I'll kind of go with a few of those experiences while we're chatting, but that's a few of the shows I've worked on.
Cool. So you've been able to touch on some of the bigger projects that have come out in the last 10-15 years, something like that. So yeah, I've had a couple of people I know closely who've worked on stuff like Game of Thrones and even Justice League, doing some matte painting VFX stuff as well. So yeah, it seems like it actually seems like one of these things with VFX. There's kind of a wide net. A lot of studios cast to get a lot of VFX work done. I remember when we went to see Guardians of the Galaxy 2, I think at the time it was, and the list at the end of the credits for the VFX studios that were involved was just like it was never ending. There was just scaling and blur, and like there's so many people just going up and up and up. But it seems like it takes an absolute. They say it takes a village, but like it literally does. It just there's so many people, different shots, different keys. So yeah, is that something that you kind of fell into initially? Were you always in VFX initially with your career?
Yeah, actually, I started sort of picking up 3D tools at quite a young age on a game called Second Life,
Cool.
and it was basically this game where you could choose to be a content creator or you could choose to be a player. I chose to be a content creator. I had thousands of players following my brand that I'd created in the game, and I was selling all sorts of virtual clothing. This was a very long time ago. I would say this was back in 2007, 2008
Right. Cool.
At this point. So quite a long time ago. And it really helped me kind of pick up the basics of 3D. Gave me the sort of rubric of learning 3D and really learning it on my own. Obviously, at that time, there wasn't nearly the same amount of tutorials there are today. You can Google anything today. How do you do this in Maya? How do you do this in Substance? And it was kind of like go figure it out. So that was that experience. I actually studied film production for a while after I did the game thing for a while. I was making $2,000 a month as a young teenager. My mom was like, "This is super cool. Go continue doing this." But then I switched into film production and really learning that. I've had a big passion for film and filmmaking since I was very young. So I naturally went to a school for that, paid a lot of money, ridiculous amounts of money, as people know how it is in film and visual effects studies. Didn't really do much with that. I made some music videos and, whatever. But I actually got into casting. I was a casting director for about 4 years, mostly background casting. I did some special and principal casting as well. Did that for 4 years, decided that I really wasn't interested in judging people for a living for the rest of my life, or judging people's looks and whatever their for their entire careers, and that just felt kind of awkward. So stopped doing that. It was very overwhelming work too. So stopped doing that, and then I went back into. I'll actually tell you a story. I was very overworked in that job. I was working like 15 hours a day, really, every day, like 6 or 7 days a week. Jesus. Getting underpaid for sure at that time. And I was so overworked and I started to stress out so much that I ended up in the hospital. So I ended up with an appendix that was about to blow, and so got that out. And as I was going into surgery, I kind of called the office at that time. And I said, "Look, I'm not coming back to work. I can't. This is not good for my health. I'm going into surgery, and this
Thank God
is
for
it.
that.
Yeah, so that's sort of how I got into visual effects, because when I woke up from the surgery and I was in the recovery room, I remember seeing an ad on the TV for some sort of CG school. I can't remember what it was at this time, but
Yeah.
I was like, oh, come learn CG and, do 3D stuff. And so kind of immediately I was on my phone. I was like, okay, I got to find out the closest school to me. I live in Vancouver here in Canada. So
Cool.
I ended up finding the school that's closest to me, and I ended up signing up and got a little bit of a scholarship to go, and it was a fantastic experience. It was very hard to get into, and ended up learning from some of the best people in the industry. My mentor at that school was Justin Holt,
Cool.
who has worked on Elysium, has worked on like some of the earliest Hulk characters and whatnot. And Justin was an amazing person to learn from, because he kind of just let you do what you needed to do, but stepped in where there was a gap. Where a lot of teachers try to create this curriculum, and you're very forced to learn very specifically what you need to do, and so you never get the tools to figure things out. And as you know, in CG, it's like 90% figure out why this shot is dropping, why is this frame dropping, why is it's not working. So it really gave me a lot of the right tools. So I started working. I didn't even get to graduate. I got picked up 8 months into my studies. I wish I had finished, but got started right away. The first show I worked on was Final Fantasy King's Glaive at a studio called Waterproof here in Vancouver.
Nice.
So they do mostly cinematics and whatnot, but at that time they were working on that show.
Nice.
That's a little bit about how I got started in visual effects.
Yeah, wow. Okay, well, I mean, great things. You seem to have touched so many amazing projects. Like it's crazy now that you're kind of aiming for games. Is it because you feel like you've done enough in the VFX space? And we did talk obviously previously as well about the state of VFX at the moment as well. I mean, was there part of that as well, or was it just mostly because you felt that you'd had enough of that side of the industry?
Actually, when I was going into the visual effects school, I actually went to it with the mindset of I want to get a job in the games industry. I was thinking at that time, like, hey, I really want to be in games. I've always kind of watched. I just so happened to be good at hyperrealism, texturing, and look dev, and that was sort of my specialty. And so I just kind of it wasn't natural at that time to get into the games industry if that was your specialty. You kind of just go into film for that. So it was in the back of my mind. I always wanted to kind of get into games. As I said, I started picking up CG tools in games. So it's always kind of been there, but I would say things like Unreal Engine 5 and all the greatest technologies that are really starting to merge and blur the lines immensely between visual effects and games as two separate industries. Really piqued my interest. I started picking it up very quickly, just experimenting it on my own, and learning how to bring this fidelity that we're used to in visual effects into games. Which has been done, but I think you're going to start to see a lot more impressive results with this high caliber hyper realism work. Even if it's stylized, it can still be realistic stylized, right? So it's that like quality, that fidelity that you're really looking for. So it's really the tools changed and the timing was perfect. And I started seeing this urge in me to create a franchise and to create a story, to create
do your own thing.
A universe essentially that people can fall in love with.
Cool.
So that was my first focus, and then it just happened to be that games was one of the best ways to do that.
Nice. So I take it were you impressed with the Matrix demo in the Unreal released, or was that something that caught your eye initially?
I think it's really cool. I mean, they're basically taking again these experiences that we're so used to, these iconic moments that we're really used to, and putting them into the perspective of what is the latest technology and how can we review those universes. So in that sense, I love it. I love seeing new tech being used to recycle things that we're kind of used to seeing in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, definitely when we played through it, I think initially on my Xbox just to try it, because it wasn't even on a PC at the time. I know they've new released the Unreal Engine 5 and the demo city, but yeah, playing the game through was crazy to think how far. I mean, I started on, Sony PlayStation, even back then Sega Mega Drive. So I mean, it's like in the span of my life to see where games are now as opposed to VFX and film. Like you said, it's blurring those lines between the two of them, which is crazy. It boggles my mind to think where we're going to be in 5 to 10 years again, like what's going to be the next crazy thing. But I think even with our company, with the guys I'm working with right now, they're also taking a huge interest in VR and AR tech, which I think also is going to really start to weave in between that as well, and make things even more blurred between the realms of reality and games. So you started this new studio, so this is, and it's Blinkmoon. Is there an idea behind what you're creating so far? Have you guys kind of released anything publicly, or is it still like a lot of visual development that you're doing right now?
Yeah, I can tell you just basic details.
Mhm.
We haven't announced the 2 titles that we're working on
Mhm.
yet, but we are building Unreal Engine 5 games,
Mhm.
PC oriented.
Mhm.
We're interested in porting to other platforms. Unreal Engine
Mhm.
makes that very easy.
Mhm.
So in that sense, we are sort of cross-platform
Yep.
as well.
Mhm.
I would say so. One game is more of a story-driven
Mhm.
tactical stealth game, and
Okay.
the
Cool.
other is a multiplayer online competitive game
Cool.
that's more focused on player versus environment. So,
Cool.
without giving too much away, that's sort of what we're working on today.
Nice. Nice. And the team you've built right now, is that people that you've sourced specifically from a games background, or have you brought people from the VFX world also over to what you're doing?
That's a really good question. Actually, most of the people we have right now are from visual effects
Okay.
predominantly.
No.
We are just starting to bring in some highly experienced. I mean, we have 1 or 2 people who come from traditional games that have never touched
Mhm.
visual effects already,
Right.
but we're really now focusing on, now that we've built up this pipeline and now that
Mhm.
we've built up the infrastructure to allow artists to work,
Yep.
which, by the way, we're to be considered one of the first fully remote, fully cloud-based game studios in the world. I
Nice.
mean, even if you think about COVID, like 2
Mhm.
years ago,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
wasn't a common thing for
Mhm.
games startups to
Yeah.
start on the cloud. You would
Mhm.
always get a location, you
Yep.
would get people in. It was kind of like an attractive thing to even have a location, but we
Mhm.
decided, look, it's a bunch of waste of money. We'd rather pay the artists more and have it all completely
Remote.
on the cloud and have
Yeah.
it be
Yeah.
like, hey, doesn't matter if you're in Dubai or if you're in Thailand or if you're in Canada, you can join. So we actually have
Yeah.
people from 7 different countries,
Mhm.
but yeah. So to answer your question, we haven't announced this yet, so I'll give
Mhm.
you a little bit hint of this, but we've just brought in a head of engineering that
Mhm.
has 25 plus years in the games industry.
Nice.
I can't say from where yet until
Mhm.
it's officialized, but
Yeah.
I'm very excited to bring him on board.
Yeah, I think the whole remote thing's definitely, yeah, COVID has changed the way I think we've looked at games production and the way studios can work, even within VFX. I mean, I know I was watching, although that was, I think it was last year it was released, was that Raya and the Last Dragon, the film that came out with, I think either Pixar or Disney, but they talked about how that whole production was done remotely, which was one of the first things I think they'd done, because they were obviously so used to collaborating in the studio. And of course, the company I'm working for in Los Angeles, um, Fabricated Madness, the world they're building, all the guys that we work with in that team are all fully remote. I mean, I'm in Scotland, the guys are in LA, we've got a couple of people in Ireland and other parts of the America. So yeah, it's been becoming more and more common, I think, and also open opportunities to other people, because I know one of the guys I know who works in games, who was down south in London, he's just started working for Respawn in LA, working on the new Star Wars title they're doing. So he's working remote from England, and they're obviously in Los Angeles in the Bay Area. So yeah, it's a good time, I think, for the industry, and I think we're going to see more and more of that as we go
Well,
forward.
honestly, when you think about like remote working, I mean, I've worked at a number of studios now, and I always had like an hour commute. It was
Right.
like, you have to pay for the gas,
Yeah,
pay
yeah,
for the parking,
yeah.
pay for the insurance for the car, and all this. You're not very eco-friendly,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
a million different things that it's just like, why were we ever not, as people who sit on a computer all day,
of course.
why were we not doing this before?
Yeah.
So, uh, and I think the other thing is, you don't have to live in these very expensive places in the world to work, as long as
Well,
you've got good
especially
internet.
LA. I mean, LA's like a nightmare. I mean, it's just so much
Well,
money, right?
we're in Vancouver, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's very expensive.
Oh no, I just meant in general. Just like, you know,
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah.
most VFX people, well, you know, LA's kind of like ILM and stuff like that. It's like the place to be to work in films and stuff like that. I know obviously Canada has its own thing, but yeah, like people who want to like make it, yeah, they'll move to LA, but then that place is like
It's crazy
ridiculous.
to me, and just in my head, I've had some friends that have worked in the visual effects industry for a very long time that are
Yeah.
moving, 5-6 hours away from the
Yeah.
main city, and they're living for like 1/5 of what it would cost to live in the
Live in
city,
LA,
and they're still making the same money. So I'm like,
yeah, of course.
congrats, this is like
Yeah,
awesome. This is how it should be.
exactly. Yeah. No,
So
it doesn't make any sense. So one of the things I suppose I would want to prim to you guys, because you know you're starting the studio. Are you much of a gamer? Has it been something that has been a lifelong thing? Like you've played games, and I mean, because I've met so many people, you wouldn't believe the people I've interviewed in the VFX and game industry who have never played a game. It is
Mhm.
shocking. But like, yeah, is this
Yeah,
something that
you're
is
right.
also? Yeah.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean. Actually, it's funny you say that because I'll tell you a little story. So when
Mhm.
I first started on this endeavor of
Mhm.
creating a game studio and
Mhm.
creating really an IP,
Yeah.
I was put into I had an agent who basically put me into all the right rooms with some of the
Mhm.
biggest publishers in the world, the
Mhm.
Microsofts, the Tencents, the Amazons
Mhm.
of the world, right?
Mhm.
And not all of them, a lot
Mhm.
of them had really passionate gamers,
Right.
but some of them I was surprised they'd never played some of the games I was talking about. And in my head, I'm like, these are the guys who are making decisions on the games that are being funded.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was very eye-opening to me. And a lot of them had this sort of comment that what I was presenting was so refreshing, and it was a fresh breath of air for them. And I just realized, like, hey, in any industry, it
Mm.
really becomes so commercialized to the point that we forget why we're building this thing to begin with.
Of course. Yeah.
And what I was presenting was so much from the gamer's perspective. So to
Mm.
answer your question, yes, I'm a hardcore gamer. I mean, I don't get to play as much games anymore
Of
because I'm
course.
starting my own thing, and it's been
Exactly.
very busy.
Yeah.
But actually, Blinkmoon, the reason I kind of thought about the name was because the domain name was available, but also because I kind of really thought about the fact that, as a hardcore gamer, you
Mhm.
get up in the morning,
Mhm.
in your teens, early teens, especially for me,
Yeah.
and you are jumping onto the computer, you're
Mhm.
playing your favorite games with your buddies online, you've got your
Yeah.
communities, and, you blink your eye and it's already evening, right? And
Oh,
it's like
okay.
the
Clever.
moon's out already. So kind of like Blink Moon in that sort of realm of things. And I
Yeah.
just thought if I want to have some subliminal messaging, that's sort of what I would choose.
Yeah.
But I've played competitive games. I've played story-based games.
Mhm.
My Steam library, I don't know, has hundreds of games on it. So
Same.
I'm a big gamer for sure.
Yeah, cool. No, it's it was one of these things. I think the reason I wanted to get into games, it was always a passion of mine, and I always watched my story goes way back with me, collecting art of books back in 2010, 2009, and saying to myself, watching the documentaries, like, oh, I could do that, I could go make games, and then never realizing how hard it was, like how difficult it was to break in and work, and but then you get a couple of surprises now and again, like even the other day when they announced that Ron Gilbert was coming back to do Monkey Island again, like I was blown away because point and click adventures were like a thing for me back in the day, and yeah, even when you talked about story-driven stealth games, like I'm a huge Dishonored fan, like Arcane, like one of my favorite studios. So like, yeah, that was a whole thing for me, like that game as well. So, but yeah, I've played games all my life as well, and it's good to see people who start these studios with intent that they are also, aware of the lore. They know what's the history is, and because I think you've got to have some remnants of that in your proposal when you go to pitch stuff like this, because people can kind of sense when you're a bit false or fake, or you haven't got that thing behind you that maybe not believing you, and especially when you try to sell it to gamers, to public, when you come at the point you're trying to pitch or show trailers, like you want people to really believe in what you're doing. So
Yeah, we have two mantras at Blink Moon that we're trying to instill, even though we're quite fresh. We're
right.
trying to kind of instill this across the board, which
Mhm.
is one is building games on the bleeding edge of technology, and
Right.
what that means is not just the bleeding edge of technology today, but staying on that, and staying
Constantly,
on
yeah.
there's a lot of big studios that become Goliaths and they become clunky and they can't move and make decisions fast enough to stay on the latest and greatest.
Yep.
And I've been at studios where they grow at, 200 to 2,000 people.
Right.
And the technologies stay the same because you've kind of created that level for scaling purposes. And they don't want to they don't want to change anything that's going to potentially cause problems, but it ends up causing problems because you're not changing.
Yeah.
So that's one of our first mantras is always staying on the latest and greatest as much as we can. And then the next one is gamers building games, right? It's really like everybody who's working in-house has played some games in their lifetime. They're either, almost everybody has Discord, so that's kind of a good sign. And, kind of things like that, right? Is we have that energy and vibe and spirit within the studio, and we don't want it to just be the highest level of executives coming in and doing that, which we had a chance to do, and we just decided not to go that route.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. And one of these things as well is you don't want to lose your identity as well. You don't want the whole thing to kind of just fall in the wayside of money and profit, and because then it's, I mean, the whole controversy years back now with EA and Electronic Arts and that whole thing, with microtransactions and the way they treat gamers. And because it tends to be those things like once you tarnish that reputation, it can take you a lifetime to get back to some kind of ground zero where people start to trust you again and want to buy your content. So it's difficult, definitely.
I think there's a right way, by the way, and wrong way to do any type of monetization. I think a lot of studios just choose the wrong way intentionally, just knowing that it's going to make the most money. But that's a whole combo on its own.
No, I could totally agree. Yeah, I think I've always found with a lot of these things, the more honest and upfront I think you can be about why it's happening, or why you put this certain measure in place, I think it makes sense. If the game's free to play, but it's not pay to win, then that's kind of like a good balance, because then at least you can play the game without feeling that you're getting constantly slogged by people who are spending a fortune on the game. Like even I think recently when Genshin Impact came out recently, and that's been a whole explosion in not only Asia but now of course in the West, and they have their whales. They have those people who spend hundreds of thousands on packs to get characters, but people can play it at their own leisure as well. So there's a striking balance there whenever you release those games.
I mean, so many people complain about the monetization of Genshin Impact, and there's been a huge backlash in so many places there, but it's also the most successful monetized game of last year. So, people complain about it, but they still want to play it.
Of course, exactly. Yeah. And to see how I think Asia in general has now shifted the way they're making video games, like even Black Wukong, like the thing they're bringing out with the Unreal 5 technology, the Monkey King game.
The Wukong Black Man.
Yeah. The tech behind that. I mean, I remember seeing the first kind of trailers of that, and I was like, Jesus, like, it reeked of Megascan stuff, but at the same time, like, it just was so impressive what they had done with, I think only something like 20 people on their team. I was like, that's incredible. The character stuff especially, but
that actually inspired me to start what I'm doing. Was one of the reasons that gave me that like final push of like, okay, it's time. I can see that these two worlds are getting very close,
colliding. Yeah. No, the demo was always one of my buddies, Raf Gazzetti, who's one of the biggest character artists in the industry, and now he was sending me images at the time and talking about like, have you seen this trailer? And I was like, no, and like it was getting him excited, and he's working on stuff like God of War, so like I was like, if he's excited, it must be something incredible. And then watching the trailer, I was just like, blown away.
Amazing,
and stuff like the Matrix, obviously, and other things that they're coming out with. Tech.
So the ancient demo from Unreal. I don't know if you've seen that, but we actually have just brought in. We haven't announced this officially, but we have brought in one of the main artists that worked on that.
Oh wow, cool.
With Aaron Sims, yeah. And I mean, we've got some amazing people that we have worked on some of the things that you're talking about, and I'm really excited to come out in 5 or 6 months from now and say, hey, look what we're working.
We've got these people, working this. Yeah, I think. I mean, you've probably got the idea that you're trying to throw in as many super talented people at the high level you can right now to kind of kickstart all of this stuff. But the company I'm working for is kind of the opposite end, where because it's a lot of their own money they're putting into the project, a lot of the guys they're hiring like me are junior level or entry level or mid, because a lot of the senior guys, the wages are obviously exponential, for the projects I've worked on, the expectation about how much they want to get paid. So it's definitely kind of like chalk and cheese when it comes to comparisons, but I'm excited about what we're making as well. Like we'll definitely talk after about what we're doing.
We can always do a follow-up, and I'll run through something that we've made in a few months from now.
Of course, definitely. So the projects that you're now making, which you've said there's 2 of, right? So is there a timeline for these games? Like, is there an idea about when you want to have these out by, or at least announced?
Yeah, one of them, which is the tactical stealth type game I talked about, is more of a 8 to 12 month period, I would say, if I was to give you a range.
Okay, right.
Before that hits the market.
Yeah.
I mean, you know how it is with games. You kind of get to that point and you're like, you know what, we want to work a little bit more
Yeah.
and kind of get that additional polish, because now there's all these extra people that have followed it or whatever.
Of
So
course.
there is always that. But the other larger game,
Mhm.
I mean, we're looking at 2, 3, potentially even 4-year development time, right?
Right.
So
Okay.
these are much longer development times. And again, the problem is, as you get more traction for these games,
Yeah.
which you start out thinking, oh, you know what, we'll be done in a year or two.
Yeah.
You realize there's a much bigger demand potentially, and if that
Yep.
happens, then you don't want to release something that's premature.
Yeah.
So it's the age old developers not delivering with the timelines that they've promised. That's why I
Yep.
don't ever try to promise any timelines. I never give like, hey, this is the exact timeline.
Yeah.
Until you are like, you know, a few weeks from actually knowing that.
Yeah.
Because the problem is you just disappoint, and we don't want to do that. So
No. It's funny you say that. I'm about to speak to one of my friends again for the first time in a couple of years, who was one of the lead senior artists on Cyberpunk, CD Projekt
okay.
Red. And the last time I spoke to him was when he just finished The Witcher, and now he's come back in the podcast 5 years later to talk about Cyberpunk. And obviously, they've just announced the new Witcher title that's going to be on Unreal 5,
Mhm.
the confidence. And I kind of had that moment of like, oh, like I don't know how they're going to bounce back after Cyberpunk, because there was the whole thing with that, and and which is a shame, because speaking to Marek off air, like I've always said to him, that it's a shame that, because when I first started the podcast in 2016 and started going to events, the first group of people I met who were doing talks were all the guys from CD Projekt Red who'd worked on The Witcher, so who character modelers, concept artists, and the art was incredible, obviously, for The Witcher, but then Sir Cyberpunk, art book behind me. But I've met these guys and I know what they can produce, and the artwork was so incredible. It was a shame to see that whole controversy mar and really overshadow the incredible world that they had built. Really, I mean, as glitchy as it was still was really well put together, and the artistic thought behind it was still good. So, I mean, it's definitely going to be something I think you guys are going to have ahead of you, as trying to balance the sense that you want to make something huge and scale it, but to make it an incredible experience, but at the same time not overshoot, right, and
Mhm.
make it too much for your team to take on, because you guys will still be relatively small compared to AAA
Yeah, I mean,
studios.
we were like, I don't know, 3, 4 people about a month ago. We're almost at 17 or 20 now, and we're
Right,
hiring 1 or 2 people a day right
right.
now. So we're probably going to get to, I would say, 50 people this time next year, most likely.
Which is a fair size for a studio,
Um,
even a small one.
yeah, I mean, the thing is, we don't want to be the 800-man studio,
No, of
and
course, yeah.
we have no interest in that. I know a lot of game studios have that sort of work for hire mentality.
Right.
We have some co-production mentality, but not necessarily work for hire.
Yeah.
So in that sense, yeah, we're not really interested in getting that big.
Yeah.
Honestly, there is so much resources in outsourcing to other studios these days that
Yeah.
it would be silly to try to do that yourself unless you have a very good reason to.
Yeah, more and more I'm seeing it every day. More studios are going to outsourcing and external contractors, because it just doesn't make sense to have that many internal people unless for some
Yeah.
reason you want that culture. I mean, I know some studios are like that, and I mean, we're in Scotland, so down the road in Edinburgh, there's Rockstar North, who famously make Grand Theft Auto. So I mean, but I think even their studio is 200-300 people in Scotland. Globally, thousands obviously with the Rockstar Studios, but yeah, it's taken him probably a good part of 20 years to get to that state where they can manage that many people. But yeah, I think it's a bigger undertaking for anybody to get to that size. Even when I left Axis in 2017, they were scaling hugely, and I think they had went from something like 50, 60 people to 200 in the space of like a year, because they were taking on bigger and bigger projects and more stuff. So they just had more and more teams.
Yeah, and it's funny because meanwhile, at companies like at the Marvel Studios, they have 5 people managing like 30 different projects, and they're just doing the IP level.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's 2 pools of thought there, but actually that brings me to something that's kind of interesting. A lot of the visual effects studios that I've worked for, they never really had this. They hire these amazing artists, right? And a lot of visual effects artists have either a very heavy technical background, and some of them have a very creative background.
Right.
For me, it was always from creative background. I've studied art history. I've kind of had script writing and all this kind of stuff in my portfolio, and it was never utilized. And there was no avenue, there was no platform for me to say, "Hey, we have this amazing studio with tons of talent. If you put in like $50,000 into starting up a project, right, and having an ownership of IP and then pitching that to Netflix or whatever that is. There's never been a platform in the visual effects studios that I've worked at. And that's always been a big question in my mind, because I'm like, you're hiring these amazingly talented people and you're getting them to do just this, right? Because it works for the business, and I get that. But I just believe, like, I mean, there has been one studio I know of that's an animation studio here in Vancouver that does like a 2 times a year they'll have like a pitch day, which, hey, you create your presentation material, create your IPs, whatever, we'll look at it and we'll actually consider making it as a studio if it's really good. So things like that. And I'm like, man, it doesn't exist in the visual effects industry as we know it today, as much as it should, which on the game side it does. I think that's one thing that they do very well, is really hearing out and switching the roles of people and leadership, and always kind of being flexible enough to help the company really be creative as a whole.
Yeah, one of the biggest examples of that I always talk about in the podcast is Tim Schafer's studio, Double Fine, and they have an event every year called Amnesia Fortnight, where they basically take what they're working on and put it to the side, and then they have a 2-week game jam where they assign people can pitch ideas and games, and they come straight up to the front and people vote on it, and then the guys who win the ideas, they then get to pick their team, and then within the 2 weeks they make the game, and 9 times out of 10, I think every game they've made within the game jam has then been a game they've released to the public for profit or whatever. Like Headlander, Caution Quest, a lot of those games came from the game jam ideas. So it's a great culture to really refresh people, and obviously then see if people can then step into leadership roles themselves and lead teams, which then means you've got more people to then put into those roles in the studios, and it gives you that opportunity to test them within their culture. So very clever idea, I think. Yeah, it would be probably something that I think more game studios probably should adapt, but I think they get away with it because they're still relatively small compared to some of the bigger places. But and
I mean, I think with visual effects, we were talking about sort of the merger and of visual effects and games coming together. I think this is one thing I said in another podcast that I was on recently. The two worlds have come together so closely at this point that I think you're going to start to see that becomes one industry, right? And what I mean by that is it just becomes creative houses, where you have some of the best people in the industry, and you've got a workforce behind them, and they're leading that workforce in producing whatever content that you need in 3D, right? We're really focusing on CG, whether that's a game or whether that's an animated TV series or it's a shot in visual effects, right? You can take on a little bit of have different departments that kind of specialize in those, but have a crossover there. Right now, there is very little crossover because we're just going from, render time to real time, essentially, right? And now that everything's starting to be real time and slowly and it'll get better and better and better, it's just going to be one big house that can manage, hey, what output do you want? Is it in this format, or is it in an interactive format, or is it in whatever? So I think that's sort of the direction places are going in the next 5-10 years. And that, in a sense, that should be the alarm that should be ringing in a lot of traditional visual effects artists' minds today, which is, if I'm not learning the new tools, if I'm not learning the new pipelines and working with real time, that's what's going to kind of not really help you in the long run if you're not doing that, right? So if you're picking those up, you're going to kind of stay on top of the trends for sure.
Yeah, I think it's one of the scariest things, I think, within my experience of visual effects and obviously within games as well, is staying current, learning the latest tools. I mean, you feel like you get a grip on one set of tools and then it shifts slightly and then you're like, oh shit, now I need to learn this. But I think the things I've always told students is that the foundation of modeling, drawing, VFX, whatever your poison is, even animation, when the program shifts or the new technology moves along, as long as you have those foundational skills, you can then just transfer them across to another set of buttons or commands or hotkeys or another.
So always, where's the button, right?
Yeah. Well, Blender's the big thing that's blowing up right now. Like, everybody wants to learn Blender, and I think I'm getting to that point when I'm catching myself, because I'm like, I'm so efficient in Maya. Like, why do I need to move to Blender? But then, like, well, there's a lot of reasons I probably should move to Blender. Apart from the fact that it's free, but like also because there is more and more every day new tools and plugins that come into the system that make it even more efficient for hard surface modeling or animation. So I think, it's difficult because you want to stay relevant, but at the same time, you try to keep your sanity as a person, where you want to have a life, you want to have a social life, you want to have, time for your partner, for your home, pets, whatever. You don't want to consume, because I know so many people on the opposite end of the scale who have like you talked about the appendix and you going to hospital. I've had people faint in the middle of like industry events because they just came off a bender like 20 hours finishing a concept for a client, and they walked straight to the event because they didn't want to miss it, and then they just passed out. And I'm like, you need to rest at one point, man. Like, you can't.
It doesn't make any sense, and I think we forget why we work so hard that we forget why we do it is to live. That's the other thing. And for us as a studio, like, because I've dealt with that, it's again, it really is something we don't do overtime right now, especially. We have
Thank
no
God.
reason to, but we don't do overtime. In fact, we have like a program that we're introducing, which is unlimited vacation time. You can go
cool.
as long as your work gets done, as long as you're meeting your milestones, you can tick off as much as you want. And
paid vacation time.
That's correct. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So,
huge.
we're really working on that program, and when it gets released, we'll have like an official sort of message on our website for that. But
interesting
really,
idea, though.
Yeah, and I think a few studios are doing it, and some studios are doing like 4-day weeks or whatever, and other methods. But it just needs to get better because the work will always be there. The work will always be there. There will never be a moment where people will just stop watching TV, or people will just stop playing games.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So in that sense, the work will always be there. It's just a matter of how do you manage that as a studio so that you can bring in and keep that talent alive and well.
Yeah.
Basically.
We had that whole conversation. Our CEO, so the guy we worked for, Matt Gazer, Matt was actually he's a 20-year veteran and working in the film and game industry for Warner Brothers, Paramount, DreamWorks, Disney. One of his first jobs was working backgrounds for Rugrats, the TV show, and then went on a Skywalker Ranch and worked there for a couple of years on the Clone Wars series with Dave Filoni. So like, he's worked in that industry for long enough. So when we came to start in his studio, there was huge rules of like, you didn't want us to work the weekends after 5 o'clock. Like, we shut our computers off after 8-hour days and we go just, go away from the computer, do something else. Because he had suffered for many years doing that kind of stuff with crunch and many hours working on films and getting Viscomp done for stuff. And even before he started the studio, he was finishing off 2 or 3 films. I think he worked on that DC Super Pets film that just came out recently. Like, he done a lot of visual development on that. And famously worked on like Cloudy by Chance and Meatball, Angry Birds, like loads of those kind of animated films. But also worked with Riot Games, Blizzard, loads of other people. But yeah, he was very conscious of making sure that we didn't overwork ourselves, because he said there's something really interesting. I never really thought about this, but he was like, yeah, there's not a lot of people in their industry that are over 50 when you think about it, or over 45. Like, it seems to be a very young man's game. Like, you get to a point in your industry life and you're like, I'm done. You know what I mean?
Yeah, when you see somebody who's over 50 and working in visual effects, you're like, oh my God, that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Where did you come from? How are you still here?
And I have worked with some people like that, and I think the thing I've always seen is that they've paced themselves, actually, regardless of what the studio needs. They've just said, look, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to make my health suffer. I'd rather you guys have me long term and be here for the next 10, 15 years or whatever, than just me burning out in a year or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think culturally, games has been way better with that too. That's another thing. Like, visual, I mean, not all game studios. I've definitely seen some horror stories over time, but
heard about them.
Yeah, it's that sort of long-term mentality of, we got to get this done for the next 3 years, right?
Yeah.
It's not a show where you're like, oh, you got 6 to 12 months, go and finish it. Yeah.
I think film in a sense has that worse mentality because of the turnaround times of films. And like my friend Ian, who we said in the podcast recently, he's a map painter, so he done, I think at Scaling, he done stuff for Justice League, and he was doing, he was given say 100 shots to do in like 5 weeks, and it was trying to get those all out as quick as it could. We'd try to take time off, but then of course inevitably, because the shots came back and something had to be changed, then he was working on that. So it ends up, you're doing again 10, 12 hours at the studio. And he was just, although he was getting to work on these massive big projects, he was getting to a point, he was like, I'm so done with like, he almost was like walking back to advertisement with his arms open, because he's like, it was so much better run and better paid, and like the shows were better to do, and the thing, compared to the movie stuff, when the turnarounds are, crazy, because there's like hundreds and hundreds of shots get to done, thousands at one point, and you've only maybe got a team of 15 people, and you're saying to yourself, what you're giving this guy 500 shots to do in like 3 weeks, like, is he going to do it? Is he going to finish it? Like, mind-boggling stuff.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Visual effects is an amazing industry for that. I mean, the output of people is compared to other industries. I'm like, I don't know how you did that, but
Yeah.
amazing.
I don't know how you got that film finished, but thank God. Yeah, but but it's always at the detriment of other people, and even recently, not even just the VFX guys, but there was a whole strike with the extras, not extras, sorry, well, the runners and a lot of people within the film industry who were talking about how they were doing 13, 14 hours on set, and then they were having to drive home in LA traffic, and some of them were like, nodding off and almost dying in their car, so like there's a whole, I mean, you talked about it recently, how you said, you don't feel that VFX is maybe in the trouble a lot of people talk about, but do you feel that there is a danger in the industry, or an inherent culture that really needs to shift, towards like better work culture in general?
I think it will happen naturally because it's a matter of time, right? Like, depends how much. What is a scale of time or scope of time that we're talking about? If you're talking about the next couple of years, probably not going to happen that fast. But if you're talking about the next 10 to 20 years, even 5 to 10 years, I think it'll happen. And the reason for that is I was just at GDC, for example, and everything is starting to be automated. When I was looking at like voiceover, for example, right? Let's look outside of our industry for a second. Voiceover is something that you go through this whole process. You hire a casting director. That casting director that has to do auditions with voiceover talent has to go through this whole process. Many hours there just to get the right people. You get the person who can do the right expressions, the right level of tone for that character. You bring them in. There's recording artists. There's a million different things that goes into actually recording it and ensuring putting it into the game or putting it into the animated series or whatever that is. Right. There was I can't remember the company's name, unfortunately, but there was a table there at GDC, and it was a brand new company. If I remember the name, I'll try to let you know, and you can put it in the description or whatever. But they had this AI that was basically doing voiceover for your characters in the game, and all you had to do is put in the line and put in like moment, take a breath, or whatever. Sigh, all these different expressions that human beings have, and it would take those pauses, and it was so natural. And the crazy thing is, it wasn't just saying them because it was normal mode. But then they had, okay, now make it angry. Okay, now make it sad, make it surprised, make it whatever. And it was doing, and I was like, oh my God, this is this is, and it was brand new. So there's additional work for them to do and make it better. But for me, it was just like, this is crazy. And if you think about it now, that happening in visual effects, well, it's already happening. When you think about buildings being created procedurally in massive cities being created procedurally, and the whole like, there was just recently received capture reality in Unreal Engine. You just like
with your phone. Oh, that was crazy. Even Houdini, the way Houdini works now as well. I mean, like,
what I was going to say is the point I was trying to make is as that starts to happen, it becomes automized, and it becomes less about doing those crazy hours, and it becomes more about controlling the quality and controlling the artistic direction that you
almost
want
art directing the AI is really
exactly
what I'm trying to say. Like, there was a guy in my Facebook who added me, and he wanted to come on the podcast, and I need to track him down, but he basically invented a software where you would go into a search box and type in like 80s kids room or something like that, and the program would generate in 3D a set, like the kids room with the computer on it and the bed and everything. Like, it was AI driven, so you would just type in what you wanted and it would drop it in the scene. So there's that whole, even with the metahuman thing, right? People were saying like, like character artists are done, like they're not going to need to, but then there's still an extent of like, you're going to need to model an extent or sculpt something that you specifically need for that game. So it's AI, like anything, will become another tool, but it won't replace the artistic intent of a person. Which is something,
I think
again,
it will be very, very hard for AI to ever be truly artistic. I think there've been attempts at it already. And it doesn't really match up. I think that's going to take a long time. So I don't think in our lifetimes
another 50 years maybe. It'll start coming close to it. Definitely. So again, with Blinkmoon Studios, you guys are just up and running, and you're getting started, and you're kind of making your first steps. Is there anything that you think you would want to let guys know about the studio that you haven't really got out there yet, or something that would probably identify why people should maybe pay attention to what you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we're bringing, again, people who have worked on some of the most notable concept art that you might have seen on games like League of Legends or Overwatch or whatever, and animation from trailers like Diablo, the latest Diablo coming out, and
Nice.
Amazing Emmy award-winning visual effects supervisor. That's my co-founder, Mohsen Musavi. We're trying to create that sort of prestige house that is still humble at the same time, right?
Yeah.
And gets that sort of community aspect of, hey, let's play games together on a Friday night and like just really jam out and see what we can come up with.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's very it's a home for artists that have worked for some time in this industry. They have a caliber that allows them to transfer their talents from one industry to another if they're on the visual effects side, and for them to learn new tools and new ways of doing things if they're on the game side, because we're really merging our visual effects ideologies and methods into the games industry, right? And that's something that, for example, the guys who made Kenna Bridge of the Spirits, which was a game, those guys are predominantly visual effects from what I understand, coming from a visual effects background. And they focused on what they were good at, right? They focused on the visual effects, and it was a beautiful game. So in that sense, we are going to create a beautiful, highly polished games. At a double, what we like to say is AA games with a AAA visual polish, right? And what it's really saying is these games don't have to be $250 million budgets to look like that. And we're bringing that, and Unreal Engine 5 allows us to bring that, right? And it just got released recently officially. So pick it up, go look at Unreal Engine 5 if you want to get into the games industry. Learn Houdini if you don't already. I learned Houdini in my last visual effects company that I worked for, and amazing tool, crazy. And it, what I can say, if anybody right now was to come to me and say, hey, I've got really good Unreal Engine and Houdini experience, hire me, I'd be like, absolutely, please come on in. And on a platter too, whatever. But it's you just have to stay on top of the tech. And if you do, you become valuable. So the best value you can put into yourself is just keeping up. And that's something I don't see a lot of visual effects artists do. And it's funny because we're in an industry where things are consistently changing.
I think it's the reality of burnout as well, is that the fact that you'll work so many years on one set of programs, and then the fact that you think you've got to learn something all over again, it maybe just like brings the dread into you. So, but it was funny you were talking about bringing the VFX side in the games. Just quickly to wrap up before we end here, but we just recently interviewed Lorne Lanning, and Lorne obviously famously worked in VFX in the film industry long before he made Oddworld Inhabitants. He made the game studio that made Abe's Odyssey, and that was the same career they basically went. They took a lot of their cutting edge technology and the standards they had within film, and then moved it across the games because they knew they could make those visuals, those big experiences, and then combine it into a system that was then pushing at the time CD quality audio and visual. So yeah, it's probably going to actually be in your advantage, because I know some of the games guys who work within the flow that they have couldn't really push the VFX, because there's that level of fidelity you have, I think, when you work within cinematics versus games. So yeah, I think you're probably in a good footing for where you are right now. So yeah, interesting time, and of course this is like the beginning. So hopefully, a couple of years down the line, or even a year down the line, when you guys have something to show, then
absolutely
come back on.
Yeah, we'd love to come back and show you guys what we've been working on.
Awesome, great, can't wait. Well, just again to say thanks to Hugh. If any people who are listening who want to get in the film or industry, or want to get work with you guys, and they have a kind of reel or demo or an art station, are you okay for me to leave details down below? Can you guys get in touch with applications?
Sure, yeah. We have hello@blinkmoon.com that they can kind of message if they're casually messaging us, and then we have official job board on our website as well, blinkmoon.com. So you can check that out.
Awesome. Okay, that's great. Yeah, again, if you guys are listening, I'll leave all the details down below. You can get in touch with Hugh and his team if you have an interest in what they're doing, or you want to even just reach out and talk to them about anything. And again, for guys who have got to this point, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. It was great to have you on, and I'm sure we'll see a lot from his team. Hopefully in the future we'll be really blown away with whatever they create. I'm sure it'll be incredible. And thanks again for coming on, Hugh. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Again, guys, you guys can check us out on YouTube for the visual audio kind of version. We have nice cameras with our pretty faces on them. So if you guys want to go to YouTube and see them, you can see it there. Again, we're on most podcast services, so Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts. We're all across the board. And if you want to leave us any kind of likes, reviews, or anything on YouTube, if you want to share, it always helps us out. And yeah, again, whatever's going on in the world, I hope you guys are staying safe and creative, and we will see you guys in the next episode. Thanks, guys. Bye.